Chrysalis weapon Huey was referring to. You know what to do.
would she find awaiting her return to Russia? The one who'd turned her sleeper against her, who'd fed them lies all this time. It was her former comrade in arms, the father of her child, the man known as the Sorrow. He didn't know it was the boss who'd set the sleeper. Or to be more precise, the Soviet philosophers never told him. Former lovers, forced to fight to the death. One would live and one would die, she told me. That was the revenge the Soviet philosophers had in store for me. If both of them survived, their child would suffer in their place. They were left with no other option. The boss shot him. He offered no resistance. When she returned from the Soviet Union, there was no place left for her to go. She'd sacrificed everything. Everything. For her country. And in return, they treated her like a dead woman. She was made a scapegoat for no good reason. Only because power had changed hands in Washington. Any lesser being would have long since cracked. It was then that one of her old SAS comrades reached out to her, Major Zero, and so Fox was born. She undertook a mission that, well, you should know better than anybody. You are a part of it. 20 days after Shepard's flight, President Kennedy announced that America would put a man on the moon. Without the intelligence the boss obtained, America's space program would never have caught up. Armstrong and Aldrin might never have walked on the moon. But the Americans' gain had cost the boss her health, her honor, and the man she loved. The word tragedy doesn't even begin to describe what she endured. The Soviets continued their manned space flights, and in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the so-called first woman in space. It's said they took their cue from NASA's long-buried Mercury Lady project. And so that, Snake, is the mission that kept her away from you for so long. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not use me as her agent? She knew I'd never even think of betraying her. I think it's because she didn't want to drag you into it. She probably knew what was going to happen. To complete the mission, she'd have to turn to the philosophers, and once she did that, whatever came of it, there'd be a price to pay. No one understood that better than her. So please, Snake, let it go. When she gave me the photo, she left me to decide whether or not to pass it along to you. I know she was torn about it, just as I was. She knew you'd probably blame yourself. Why did she hold on to it for so long? That, I can't say. To remind her of how much it hurt to be erased. She wasn't that kind of person. No. I think she meant it to be a message to you. She had her identity, her life, taken away. But she wanted you, of all people, to know the truth. Snake, you've probably already figured this out, but it's no accident that I'm only now sending you something I've withheld for so long. A little bird tells me you recently made a big decision. You and the boss are different people. I understand that. And I'm not trying to second guess you. I simply wanted you to know what she saw, how she felt. That's all. Keep it with you, Snake. Keep it deep inside. Don't ever forget the path she took. Because you and I are the only people on this earth who know the truth.
Boss, I'm sorry, but I can't. Attack the AI pod to destroy its hatch. It's the cylindrical structure. Hurry up and get in the AI pod. unmanned weapon, the Cocoon. Put it out of commission.
I am about to leave for Costa Rica, a place completely unfamiliar to me, and on a top-secret mission for the CIA, no less. No guarantees I'll come back alive. Might even get rubbed out by the CIA itself. So I'm leaving behind this record. For her sake. For the boss's honor. Ever since I was a child, I've loved to look up at the night sky. I'd go outside after sunset and drink in the cold air. The moon, Venus, so many stars floating on the edge of infinity. In Manchester, it wasn't very often you saw the night sky in all its star-studded glory, but it was enough to stir a deep longing inside me. Even as others cowered beneath Nazi air raids, I was out there, watching the skies, dreaming of one day reaching the heavens. There were, of course, more practical concerns. My skin was incredibly sensitive. Even the slightest bit of sun would turn it an angry shade of red. Playing outside during the day was completely out of the question. Naturally, I hardly ever had a chance to play with other children my age. But I never felt lonely for it. Their way of thinking was irrational, making them simple, easy to predict. The boys would talk of tanks and aeroplanes and creepy, crawly bugs. The girls of pretty dresses, glass beads, and tea and cakes. Of boys they liked. I never had much to say on such matters. The curious thing is, adults really aren't all that different. They're simple, capricious, especially men. As they get older, their heads filled with thoughts of women, and more women. Thankfully, I always did have a head for mathematics. When I was about 10, I visited Dr. Turing, who lived nearby. We'd sit and discuss mathematical logic. The lights were always on at his house, even in the dead of night. Theoretically, he'd say, there's no algorithm that a computing machine couldn't reproduce. Dr. Turing wasn't foolish like other men. although I didn't find out why until later, after he died. The time will come, he'd say, when computers will be able to think for themselves. That idea rocked me to my core. My aptitude for mathematics brought me closer to the stars. I breezed through school, then went to America for university. While I was studying at Caltech, NASA was established. I signed up in a heartbeat. I was a pretty good computer engineer at the time, and NASA needed skills like mine. The work was enjoyable. Even though I'd given up on going into space myself, it was a pleasure just being a part of it all. I was assigned to Project Mercury, America's effort to compete with the Soviets in manned spaceflight. 7 men were chosen as pilot candidates for the program, becoming heroes overnight. People called them the Mercury 7. The project made good progress, more or less. We had all the funds and materials we needed. After countless hours of analysis, we even had plans for something on par with Sputnik. We thought it'd only be a matter of time before we caught up with the Russians. They'd sent a dog into orbit and brought it back safely to Earth. But NASA top brass dismissed that success as a fluke. The Americans recovered their re-entry capsules at sea, but the only ocean bordering the Soviet Union is the Arctic, so their re-entry capsules had to make impact on land. A dog was one thing, but human spaceflight would still take some time, or so we thought. At the end of January 1961, we successfully put a chimpanzee named Ham into orbit. He returned to Earth as healthy as ever. NASA was giddy with success. It was then that a new woman showed up for duty. She was a backup pilot and advisor. She was beautiful, with blonde hair, strong mouth, and a steely gaze. But there was something else in those eyes, a twinkle of something warmer, of affection. It was the boss. She took one look at us in our revelry and murmured, "Savor this joy today, because tomorrow you'll have to face the truth." And she was right. The next day, our project schedule was accelerated. We'd received new information that the Soviets were mere months away from putting a man into space. The brass had misjudged the Russians. We couldn't afford to allow the shock of another Sputnik. Somehow, we had to get a man into space before the Russians did. It was an utterly impossible task. We'd only just put our first chimp up. With a human on board, failure was not an option, especially if it were one of the Mercury 7 Golden Boys. And on top of that, the brass wanted to put a window in the spacecraft. The pilot wouldn't be a test animal this time, they said. And when this hero came back alive and well, they wanted him to describe what he'd seen. It was madness. Adding a window to our existing spacecraft would leave it unable to handle the stress. Not to mention the problem of shielding the occupant from cosmic rays. But the boss rose to the task, and splendidly. She claimed to be a layman when it came to space, but caught on keenly to new ideas and concepts. She was demanding of herself and of others. She seemed rather cold-hearted at times, but I was smitten. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was wise. Her mind was thoroughly rational, and yet no matter how I tried, I could never predict her actions. It was easy for me to assume that her judgments were drawn from an enormous base of knowledge. Quite simply, her life experiences were more diverse, more intense than anyone else's. To me, they seemed boundless in their breadth. In her, I saw a reflection of the night sky. Perhaps because I too was a woman, she and I became close. I couldn't go out in the sun, but she lit up my life. Her light was soft, like that of the moon. I was so happy. With her unerring guidance, the project steadily regained its footing. But one issue remained, the pilot's safety. When the day came to choose a pilot, the Mercury 7 just quietly walked out. Who could blame them? It was far too great a risk to take. Even if they'd volunteered, NASA would never have let them go. They were national heroes, basking in the media spotlight. There was no way they'd be sent on such a mission. The conference room was silent. Then, slowly, she raised her hand, almost as if acting out a scene from a movie.
Are you listening? Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!